And we are live. Yonatan, can you hear me?
Yes.
טוב מאוד. That's my attempt at Hebrew. So I would like to welcome everyone back to Pride in the Living Room, Jewmos edition. So a quick reminder, this project was founded by Agudah in memory of the 2009 Tel Aviv Gay Center shooting and the Jerusalem Pride Parade stabbing in 2015. And Agudah, the LGBT task force, founded this project to offer a stage and a voice to LGBT Jews from around the world to share their stories in the hopes of spreading empathy and community. So all of that said, it is my pleasure to welcome Yonatan to the stage. Yonatan, the floor is yours.
Okay, shalom. Thank you so much. What an honor. I'm talking with you from Jerusalem, Israel. And it's a really sweet, hot morning here. And I would love to share with you a little bit of my upbringing and connection with the Jewish and LGBTQ community. As a son of a diplomat, I grew up in several countries. I grew up in the States from 5 to 9 in Philadelphia, and then in Nepal, Kathmandu for several months at the age of 13. And at the age of 15, I moved to Istanbul, Turkey, and Istanbul, Turkey for 1 year. So all of these junctions on my road have really enlightened me regarding the importance of a community. And growing up as a son of a diplomat, which is also in the backstage of my professional life at the moment, I realized with much empathy and compassion today that my mother chose work over family. So the Jewish communities that I grew up in, both mainly in the diaspora, were like a second family to me. And since I remember myself, I was always really keen to be a part, to feel a belonging of some sort. And I think that growing up, I realized that finding relationships, finding community, finding the other as that which can help you grow or parent you or be a model for you is something that I discovered both as an LGBTQ and also as a Jew. So that's sort of like the backstage of my Jewish journey, and I'd like to share a little bit of my LGBTQ journey. So as the youngest child, I was very much into theater from an early age. I returned, as I said, at the age of 9 from America, and the first thing I wanted to do is like a theater production. I remember I was like in a group. There was a really sweet group of friends growing up here in Jerusalem in my elementary school of girls and boys, and we were always like riding, like the boys were riding the bikes, the girls were riding the how is it called now? Not the skateboards, they were riding something else. The things that you put on your feet, I don't remember now how they're called, but the wheels that you put on your feet and you drive in the
Roller skates.
Roller skates. Thank you. Yeah, I thought about skates, and then it's like roller skates. Great. So the boys were always like running away from the girls, and the girls were catching us, and we were catching them, and already at the age of 10 or 9, when I came back, I already had a girlfriend because I was really connected with all this group of girls, and we were really hanging out a lot. And she brought me the first time to a dancing class. And in the dancing class, like Billy Elliot, I was the only boy, with pros and cons to that. I really found some solace in dancing. She brought me into a jazz and hip hop, and then it was continuing with, with ballet and with jazz and with all sorts of different types of movement techniques. And I actually felt that the stage and dancing was some sort of a lifesaver in a place where at the age of 10, I realized that I'm different. So as I said, we were a group of boys, a group of girls. And among the group of boys, we were usually touching one another, touching like friends touch, and the knees and the biceps and the head and the shoulders. We were just like exploring touch. And I remember this one time that I really felt an erection from a good friend of mine that touched me. Again, on the knees or on the belly. I don't really remember where. And there was a moment there where we looked at each other's eyes, and he noticed that I'm aroused, that I'm connected, that I feel like some sort of an excitement from him. And that was the first time that I discovered that I'm different at the age of 10 while still having a girlfriend. And he was very, very nervous and shy. And then actually he didn't want to talk with me. We had some sort of a quarrel. We didn't, of course, fulfill. He didn't touch me and anything. And I remember back then, like 20 years ago, it's not that back then, but we used to write letters to one another, and it's very, very sweet to write one another letters. So we wrote each other a letter, me and this friend, we'll call him I, as to not expose him. And he wrote to me, that he understands that I'm gay. Like the first time I heard that term came from this friend. And I was like, what is that? Like, really? Like, is he not talking to me because he feels like I'm gay? So the relationship somehow faded away. And I was left with this feeling of being a bit outcasted, even though, it wasn't, I still had this girlfriend, I still had friends in school. But that was the first time at the age of 10 that I realized that I'm different, that I'm odd, that somebody else is actually defining me in a way that I might not yet know how to articulate or define myself. Years passed, I continued with dancing. Dance was really a lifesaver in regards to accepting myself. I remember when I went to an arts high school, so finishing elementary school in Israel, you usually go to a high school, and you leave the elementary school, you leave the same group of friends. So breaking up from that girl, I went to a high school, very arts liberal one, with theater and dance and cinema. It was a really, really sweet high school. And I remember that I had really good friends that I wanted more of them than they could have given me. So I really remember, if we're talking about touch, even then, I think that at least there was something sweet in exploring touch or connection or intimacy without acting upon it. I remember like pajama parties that we used to touch, and I used to feel an erection, or I used to feel different. And I remember days of crying, of going back home after a day where, I felt like I wanted again more than I received or I gave of myself. It's called appropriate entitlement. It's actually a really interesting term in psychology today that I realized that I give of myself more. In order to be, in order to be loved, in order to be seen, in order to be touched, I give of myself more, while the other doesn't really know how to relate to it, or to emphasize empathy, you know what I meant, empathy and sympathy, and I remember those days crying out of that frustration for wanting more than my friends could give me, my close boyfriends, which we were only friends. And then at the age of 15, I left to Istanbul, Turkey. So I was around, I said I was in Nepal for a few months, but I always got back to that high school. And I left to Istanbul, Turkey, and at the age of 15. And I remember saying to all my class that I hope I will not come back again. Like I was like this rebellious teenager, like really frustrated from certain friends there. And I said to everyone, I'm leaving and I'm not coming back. I moved to Istanbul, Turkey. I was in an international high school, and it was very, very challenging high school. There was anti-Semitism. Actually, that was the first time I was in a youth group, a Jewish youth group. I was much more friendly with the Jews and Israelis there because there were a lot of sons of diplomats, children of diplomats coming from Saudi Arabia and from different Arab countries. And some of the Jews and also us, the Israelis, didn't feel connected and felt a bit of anti-Semitism from them. Very much it was a beautifully academical high school. I really loved studying there, and yet socially it was very, very challenging. There was the second time I was outcasted as a gay person. So I remember it's probably very common, but in Israel it's not so, that you always have, like, when you go to gym, there's always the lockers, the room of the lockers and whatnot. And I really remember at times, people having to exchange clothes, and they didn't want me to see them. The boys didn't want me to see them naked or with boxers, and I really like, how could everybody already define me when I haven't yet accepted myself as a gay person, and haven't yet come out and haven't yet said to the world, what does that mean when a teenager is actually defined externally by, by the way that he acts, or by the way that he talks, by the way that he is more feminine connected, while he himself still doesn't know how to articulate or say to the world, yes, I'm gay and I celebrate it. So I remember myself crying there also in school in the breaks, in this beautiful farm that was like next to a farm. So I left. So I remember myself really out of it socially with the boys over there, and I was really interested and keen on relating more and more to the Jewish community. There was a really wonderful youth group. Unfortunately, the Jewish situation today in Istanbul, Turkey, is less less celebrative today, after the bombings were in the shuls there, where my mother was during her consulate, her being a consul general, that the bombings occurred. But Jewish life is less celebrated today in Istanbul, Turkey. But I remember back then that was what was keeping me, socially alive. Like, where do you feel alive as a teenager, right? Alive not only with friends, but also spiritually and connected in the sense of belonging. And so that year passed, and I said to my parents, I want to leave to a boarding school. I read a separate piece by John Knowles, which was a wonderful homoerotic book that I really remember taking place in a boarding school in the States somewhere. That really connected me to how could I relate to a beautiful romantic relationship through a novel. So I was really keen on wanting to go to a boarding school. My mother said she doesn't want me to leave so far, and she's not letting go of me. I returned to Israel, back to that same high school that I told them that I don't want to come back to. And at the age of 17, I got into a bar that I was not allowed in, the only gay bar back then in Jerusalem, Israel. And I returned to dance. I actually fell in love with dancing again. So I was dancing a lot in bars, not back to classes yet. And there was this one time, this beautiful boy that also had an afro, a bit like me. I don't have it so much now, but I had really beautiful curly hair, a bit like Hair, if you remember the the Broadway show Hair. And he hit on me. He said, he danced with me. We did some contact improv, and then he said, let's go outside. So we started walking outside in Jerusalem. And back then I didn't have a cell phone, which I'm so thankful I didn't have. And he just took my address, just took my family's address. And after 2 weeks, he started sending me almost every week the most beautiful romantic love letters from his dance company up north. And thankfully, his parents lived in Jerusalem, and we met, and we had a really, really beautiful, like in the books, like in the novels, like a beautiful beginning platonic, but later also sexual and romantic relationship for almost half a year. With going out to beautiful spaces in Jerusalem, with him writing to me letters. And then he started realizing that I'm not yet fully accepting of my gayness, even though we already had intimacy. I'm not sure if we had penetrational sex, but we had already beautiful intimacy. And And he said to me, you need to go and explore. You need to go be with a woman to see if, and I'm giving you much more love than you're giving me back. So I think it's best that we let go. And so I went with his blessing to explore a relationship with a woman. And it was a really beautiful relationship with a woman that I've had from my same high school, year under me, in theater as well. And I wasn't connected, I wasn't aroused. And we were like, she was also a bit suicidal back then. Now she's not, she's a PhD student in Canada. So I was like, I'm saving her, and yet she's saving me from my sexuality. Like there's some sort of a relationship there that is not healthy. Like I'm there for her in her moments of crisis, emotional crisis, regardless of her sexual identity. And she's there in order for me to better explore and understand what's happening with my life. So it's a beautiful type of relationship. But at the same time, she sent me to the open house. The first time I went to the open house in Jerusalem, which had a beautiful youth center, youth group. And that was the first time that I felt comfortable in being in a community that was not Jewish at all, but was LGBTQ. And people shared, people share their challenges and anxieties. And then we broke up, and she sent me with a blessing to that youth group of LGBTQ, and I stayed there for a year or so, and yet I was the first time I had to say to myself, that's it, I want to go out, I want to sense what's happening with my sexuality. It was the day before my senior year in high school. I had the first time a sexual relationship with a boy, beautiful man with a dog, super stand-up, I said, super one-night stand, I meant. And yeah, he took me from this beach party that I went to, and it was very transactional. There was nothing really romantic in it, but there was something that I needed, my body to feel validated in. And so that was the moment that I came out to my sister, to my community in my high school as well, and to my parents. It was the hardest. I don't know, the intergenerational gap, especially here in Israel, I think is very, very challenging, where my mother was like, yeah, I knew, you thought I didn't know. She was really sweet. My father had to, I had to share with him. I tried out with a girl. It didn't work. He said something really challenging. He said he doesn't know, he feels it's like a sickness. He doesn't understand it, but he would never stand in my way. And so I'm skipping a few years after, because it's very important for me to say that I felt that the LGBTQ community back then in Jerusalem people were very proud. That this term pride in general is a bit, as I see, a bit daunting and sometimes challenging, to be proud in sexuality. I'm proud as a human being. I'm proud to be humane. I'm proud to be a peace builder, and pride in sexuality, as I see it, is a bit of it encounters some sort of challenges for me. And so I really try to find other circles of belonging. And I think that as I grew up in a very liberal, artsy high school, as I said, my mother is still in Istanbul, Turkey, until I'm 16 to 21. So until the age of 21, and I channeled my energy from the IDF to national service. And in between those times when I was without a mother in my house, my father was not accepting with my LGBT, my gayness, I went and explored Jewish communities actually in Israel that would accept me, or that I would feel belonging. And I went to a yeshiva, an Orthodox yeshiva, for people who are actually coming from either secular or religious backgrounds that want to strengthen their connection to Judaism. And it was one of the most homoerotic, beautifully inspiring, times. I slept in the yeshiva with 4 men in the same room. I didn't come out yet, but I felt that all the spiritual, sexual energy is actually beautifully contained in the way that we're learning from one another, and from one another and with one another. You really, in this type of yeshiva, you really work on not only your your values and deeds, but also in the way you talk, in the way that, like in many traditions, that words and thoughts create a reality. And there was something really, really beautiful that each one was accountable for one another in that. And there was like this homoerotic like times when we went to a mikveh, like to natural springs, fully naked, and there's something very, very refreshing. And I'm also weak. I have a weakness towards straight men, which is a different story. But I didn't come out there until 4 months in, and then it came out first and foremost. So all the rabbis there are also secular, coming from a secular background, and then they became religious also in the middle of 20s. I was in the age of 20, 21 then. And I came out to this rabbi, and he said the most awful things, these Orthodox rabbis. And I have to say it because I'm not saying the name of the yeshiva or the name of the rabbi, but I have to say it because it really opened up the way to Jewish renewal and Jewish reform movement as I'm in today. So he said that all the LGBTQ approach, together with the left liberal approach, is very feminine, is connected to the function, the sexual function. So if we see a straight man, like a man is represented by his erection, which means that he needs to be very decisive, very manly in the way that he's approaching his life, and also the way that he sees things. He's the one who needs to cater the woman. He needs to be on top of things, whereas all the LGBTQ left-wing approach is very feminine, is very receptive. So that was a very big turning point. I went to meditate 10 days in silence after coming out of the closet to him, and then to my friends that said that they'll pray on me. They stopped being in a relationship with me. They sent me letters of prayer and blessings. Very, very challenging time. So I went to this 10 days retreat, beautiful 10-day retreat, in silence. A lot of thoughts come, and you write a lot of things, and you understand a lot of your patterns. And so I navigated that need of sense of belonging in a Jewish community into my undergrad, where I studied Jewish philosophy and theater. So theater was always there, theater and dance. I continued on dancing thanks to my first boyfriend, 5 years in with my first girlfriend dancing, and then with my first boyfriend brought me back into dancing. And in my university years, I really created my own circles of belonging. So I was connected to a Jewish renewal community here in Jerusalem. I was connected to an arts cooperative community. And then I realized, after my undergrad, that I want to combine both art and Jewish spirituality, or spirituality in general. And so I was called from the Jewish agency. I worked with them in several capacities. I was called to this really long process of becoming a shaliach, an emissary. I was chosen to work as the Israel emissary to Columbia Barnard Hill for 3 years, which really opened my mind to the Jewish communities there in New York. I'm fast forwarding because I know we are a bit low on time, but I think that New York really opened up for me as an Israeli having traumas in the Orthodox world. In Israel, it really opened up for me the sense of celebrating a couple of identities, not only the Jewish identity, but also the queer and artistic identity, and how could we bring a culmination of all those identities into the spiritual world. And I was a part of 2 really beautiful renewal communities, Ramamu of Rabbi Ingber and Lab Shul of Rabbi Michael Levi. Coming back to Israel, I founded my own Jewish community down south for 3 years, where I studied my master's in social entrepreneurship and nonprofit management, and learning from that approach of really bringing in marginalized voices, creating the only LGBTQ Jewish community down south, and fundraising from the Avichai Foundation for it was something really, really significant for me, integrating artists, musicians, meditation leaders, creative writing facilitators. I led some of the service and led movement in it. Really brought a beautiful culmination, again, integration, interweaving of both the queer identity, but together with the art and the Jewish identity. So for 3 years, we led Shabbat services almost every other Friday, or once a month Friday, at people's houses. It started in the only LGBTQ bar, as I said, Bialik Bar 26. It was like such a great time. You know, it's beautiful at times to be only surrounded by young young spirits of students that just want to, you know, open up their hearts and create, because there's so much beautiful entry points of creativity in Beersheba as one of the it's known as the city, as a student city type of hub. So after being successful in that LGBTQ bar, and bringing again LGBTQ voices, trans voices, marginalized voices of Jews from Beersheba, we started going to people's houses. So people opened up their houses in Beersheba. There's a lot of small gardens of people, like yards that people have. And it was just like really, really wonderful to work with different musicians and different artists and different gay activists. And then I felt a calling. I felt a calling to continue on with the spiritual world together with the art world. So I founded a movement, Embodying Sacred Texts initiative, back in 2017, that brings together spiritual texts, also LGBTQ texts, also activist texts, Zionistic texts, spiritual texts of other faith traditions, together with musicians, each time a different musician, and different movement techniques. So it's infusing movement and music together with spiritual texts, and that really brought a holistic approach to my acceptance. Again, as I said, if dancing was some sort of like a safe haven for me back in the day when I grew up and came out of the closet, it sort of really brought a beautiful closure of integrating spirituality together with self-acceptance through the body, where you actually sink in and you realize that the body, you know, that the body has a lot of stories and traumas that we intake, and yet there's something very empowering to see it also as a vessel to connect with the other, if it's through improv and through contact improv and through authentic movement and different techniques in dancing, and if it's really connecting to the music and to the text. And so I brought that into fruition, and thankfully received also a full grant and a stipend and a fellowship, a Be Wise Entrepreneurship Fellowship through HUC Studies. And so I started off in New York, where I came back from a few months ago to Israel due to COVID. And it was a really successful journey so far, spiritually and in the queer sense. And now I'm back in Jerusalem after 2 years of studying in rabbinical school, and still this year I'm taking a leave of absence from New York, as I'm not going to study in Zoom. But I'm hoping to get there, and I'm aspiring to return, because I really believe that the way that Judaism and queerness is celebrated in the diaspora, not only in New York, but in other countries that I've been in, could really be an inspiring and an important toolkit for me to bring back to Israel, where I want to live at the end of the day. And so today I'm in crossroads of spiritually navigating both the Jewish spiritual path, and I just founded a Jewish Palestinian community here in Jerusalem, between East and West Jerusalem. And so trying to interweave spirituality from different faith traditions now in my spiritual path, as I really see rabbinical school as a time to take in, not only from the school and not only from the movement that you're connected with, but also from other faith traditions as you grow into this position of, again, that is very fluid. And as I see it, as today we're really in exploring, we're really called to explore. Due to COVID-19, we're really called to explore different modalities of building community. And I really believe that, as much as I'm technophobe and challenged at times with technology and with all this Zoom type of world, it really brings together community, and it really could empower a lot of people that would not necessarily go out of their comfort zone, out of their houses, to seek for community. And that's the beauty in this initiative that I'm really proud of taking a part of, that it really could enhance each other's vision of how we build community today, and how do we connect on a personal level. And I'm really inspired and really thankful to have had this opportunity to talk with you and to shed light a little bit onto my spiritual journey, both Jewish and queer. And I hope to further connect onwards, where this virtual and spiritual exploration takes us through this type of journey online.
Thank you so much, Yonatan, for taking us through your incredible story. There's something you just said which really speaks to me, which is that we are called to explore different realities and communities. We are called to explore different realities and communities. And I think that's such a powerful statement. And anyone who watches this video and who has the opportunity to hear your story is embodying those words. And I think it's so powerful for any LGBT person who is trying to find their place in the world, or any Jewish person who is trying to make peace with the LGBT person in their life, their son, their daughter, their parents, whoever it is. I think your words go a long way to help repair those relationships. So thank you.
Amen, amen. Thank you so much, Jared, for the opportunity. Thank you all. Blessed be.
If you have time, I have one or two questions.
Of course, of course. What is it? I thought that you don't have time. I have all the time.
Yeah, we have some time. Gosh, I wrote so many things down. Well, a common thread in your story is that you are a thinker. You surround yourself with ideas, you embed yourself into knowledge and the quest for learning, and what I'm interested in is so you are open to ideas, other people not so much. So I'm interested when you have interacted with other people and they have offered you, they have been maybe confused by your sexuality, or you might have disagreements with them. When you're butting heads with your sexuality or with your Judaism, how do you approach those conversations, and what gives you strength in those moments?
Wow, that's a beautiful question. So my approach in general to sexuality and to physicality as a dancer is that the body has a language of its own. I really believe, that through this self-exploring, but also relationship exploring of sexuality and of body, there's at times things that we can't fathom, that we can't rationally put into our box, or that we need to break out of this conventional indoctrination that we've been brought up to, that there's only a heteronormative relationship or a monogamous relationship. And of course, open brackets, I'm a part of the radical fairy community. At least I was in New York. I'm coming back to it in Israel. That really, questions that place of how much the heteronormative world has been, in a way, indoctrinating, the way that relationships should look like, or that monogamy should look like. And I think that, whenever I enter these conversations, and I'm entering them more and more actually with traditional Palestinians these past few months, as we've created this community, I'm really astounded by the curiosity of people towards their sexuality, and towards the question of what would it mean, right, to be in touch with a man that you would not necessarily be in relationship with. What do we find at times when I was talking of myself, right, at the age of 10, with that boy that didn't accept me? We had an intimate moment. We had a beautiful intimate moment, and let's breathe into that. Let's breathe into, the intimacy that we can connect. That, just like Buddhism is teaching us, right, to be present in the moment. Let's just allow ourselves, grant ourselves permission to let go of that chattering, judgmental mind and really be where our bodies are at the moment. I think, I've had this past few months an Arabian lover, and we connected through dance. We connected through contact, actually, because sometimes, and I'm not saying that this is something that I lead or that I necessarily encourage, but at times, right, when there's an intimacy through touch or through dancing or through talking, there's a place where, the body is now actually open to explore something new, something different, something that doesn't necessarily have to be penetrational sex or a relationship or a one-night stand. It could be hugging together, it could be cuddling together, it could be, just allowing ourselves to breathe together. And that's something that I pose as questions to people who question my sexuality or think that, that that whether we want it or not, I believe also from my experience that I confront men, especially in Israel, with their own masculinity. I think there's a lot of fear today to allow openness to a feminine type of masculinity. And I think that modeling the openness in sexuality and in acceptance, whether it be through conversation or whether it be through casual type of meetups with people, is something that is very important. It's very important because it really enables some sort of openness and some sort of tranquility and authenticity that I believe in any relationship, be it sexual or only friendship, is very, very important to see where we are, where we're growing together as friends and where we're growing together in an intimate way, that we can also explore, different ways to be intimate with one another. And of course, the feelings and the thoughts might come and might be challenging and might be a drama that, that we want more. As I said, that term of appropriate entitlement, that we want more than we can receive. And yet there's something really beautiful to remind ourselves to be in the moment and to be present with what comes up, with allowing our body to talk for ourselves and for our physicality to talk for ourselves.
When you're talking about sex, you sometimes are using the language of dance. You talk about intimacy, touch. I think you used the term contact improv at a few points. So I'm just wondering, dance has obviously been a major part of your life. And can you talk a bit about how the language of dance has guided you in your understanding of your sexuality and in the way that you interact with the world?
Beautiful questions, Jared. I love it. So, as I said, growing up and not accepting myself for several years, I knew that I'm queer from the age of 10, and I accepted myself only at the age of 17, 18, and came out to the world. I believe that the body knew, and the body knows. The body carries a lot of our stories, a lot of our traumas, as I said before. And it also carries a way to open up to the world without necessarily articulating the words. I think that we fall into those patterns that taught us that words are necessarily the way to communicate with the other. And I think that what I discovered in dance is that actually the most vulnerable moments that I have were silent or were in movements of some sort. And that's also how I see and connect with God today, right? I lead Kabbalat Shabbats, embodied Kabbalat Shabbats that connect people to themselves, to their body, regardless of sexuality. Sexuality might come out of there as a consequence, but it's not like, it's again that question of external and internal of the definitions, right? Externally, so I was starting to say about external and internal definitions. I think that the world at times sees dance, sees movement, sees the way that the body opens up in a sexual manner, or in a manner that is necessarily exuberant, flamboyant, something that might be queer, something that might be different. And yet that is a big question when you enter the world of dance. How do you yourself internally take on what it symbolizes for you? And what it symbolized for me is accepting myself, is the ability of touching myself, of holding on to something in my body that is like an anchor, right? How do we anchor ourselves in our body? How do we breathe? How do we come forward to the world, right? And just like allowing ourselves to say, yes, this is the way that I'm connecting now. This is my vessel. This is my physical being that has brought me here. And I'm not only this, right? I'm not only this, I'm also this, I'm also this, I'm also this, I'm also a lot of things. How do we delegate responsibility to different parts of our body that can actually lead us into movement, into prayer, into connection? And I think that question of being able to be vulnerable and open up your connection to different body parts and to different languages of your body is something that is magical, that has a beautiful essence to, because you step up into the unknown. You step up and you're allowing yourself to let go of that mind, of where you're at, and to see where you haven't yet breathed into, where you can find a metaphor, right, of something that you're going through. Yeah, how can we be in dialogue with one of our challenges? How can we bring in the story of unaccepting, or of not accepting ourselves, or the story of being laughed on towards our body? Where does our body ache, and how could we heal it by our own movement, or by our own like musical type of expression through dance? And I think that the queerness of it, as I see it, is actually allowing yourself self-expression and personal expression that is very, very personal. And I think that as someone, again, that maybe challenges the heteronormative type of masculine approach to what is a man, especially in the state of Israel, where the ethos of sexuality, the ethos of a man is drawn by his ability to be in combat unit in the army, his ability to sacrifice his life. We're always being indoctrinated that we have to be very strong and very manly, because that's how our country has been established, and that's how our country is still alive, by our strength. And I think that showing our weakness and expressing it also, if we don't accept necessarily our body, is a beautiful way to celebrate our otherness, our queerness, and the way that we can connect with ourselves, with the other, and with our higher selves, or be it the divine, if you connect with whatever God you wish to connect.
I have one final question for you, Yonatan.
Yes, please.
I want to go back to the beginning, something you said at the very start. You were talking about being 10 years old, and you were in your dance class, and you had this moment where, even though you didn't have the language at the time, you had this moment of self-identification, and through your interactions with you discovered the term gay, and you described it as someone else was defining me. And there were all these thoughts and all these feelings that you were living with at that time. And I just want to ask you, Yonatan, all these years later, with your wisdom and your perspective and all the incredible work that you do, if you had a chance to speak to him, what would you say?
I would look him into the eyes and start dancing with him. And I think I would be in a place where I would say to that 10-year-old, starting of depression type of boy, that the dance is at times close and at times far. So at times you're close to yourself and you feel the connections, and at times it's fine to be far. It's actually important at times to be in a zoom out, or in a dislocation, or in a place that you are challenged, because that's the only way that you can grow and be close to that self-acceptance and self-identification. I don't know if that answered the question, but
No, it does. I just had the image of you dancing with your 10-year-old self, and it made me smile.
Yeah. I wish I could, that's one of the superpowers I would love to do. And yet your life might not be the same, right? If I would have accepted myself at the age of 10, I might not have had those relationships and that need of circles of belonging, because I think that we really at times have to go through all these obstacles and explore different circles of belonging in order to actually say to ourselves, we belong no matter what.
We belong no matter what.
Yeah.
I think that's the perfect way for us to reach the end of our time together. I think that's such a beautiful message that anyone who watches this video and hears your story will be able to take away.
Amen.
I just want to thank you again, Yonatan, for spending time to be here at Pride in the Living Room. And I'll just end by saying, here's to sharing our story in this moment and many more moments in the future.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Jared. Thank you.
Amen.